Welcome everyone. This is Craig Rosenberg, known to some as the Funnelholic. I'm back again to continue our conversations with thought leaders to help piece together what we're calling a technology handbook or guidebook for CMOs and VPs of marketing. And just to I tell you every time, but the idea here was to could we create something that was very relevant, very timely, that CMO or VP of marketing could have to really understand what you need to go do to create a technology platform. And so we decided on a number of thought leaders to go out and talk to about a lot of different issues. And one of the keys that we really felt were metrics and optimization. And for that, we chose who we felt was sort of the person to talk to about metrics and optimization. And that person is David Raab. And it's a real honor to have you here, David. To do the justice I need to do to you for you, if I could have you just introduce yourself for a couple minutes before we get going.
Well, Craig, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I need to come up with a cool nickname for myself. I just realized that to match Funnelholic. But what we do, what Raab Associates does, is we're consultancy in marketing, technology, and analysis. I've been doing this pretty much since the Stone Age, going back many, many years. And more recently focused on marketing automation, B2B marketing automation space, which is a particularly intriguing one. Provide a number of services, but obviously the one we're talking about today is having to do with marketing measurement and analytics and just how people will keep track of what they're doing and know they're doing the right thing and find out how to do it better.
Yeah, that is perfect. And I do have to say that metrics and optimization seem really hard, and it is. It's actually not, I don't want to say refreshing, but it really helps to talk to David or to read what David's written. There's a presentation, a trade show or conference a while back, which has been my guide. I printed out and used, and I appreciate you having that for me. But more importantly, I think we can extract a lot of that out of your brain today and provide that to the listeners. Before we start, why don't you set the table for what metrics and optimization are in your mind, so we can sort of define, get all our definitions on the table and make sure that everyone that's listening understands what we're talking about here.
Okay, well, I think the critical point you want to make right up front is that they're different things.
Yeah.
Metrics is reporting about what happens. It's really relationship among measures. But it's basically data and data in context. Optimization is kind of what you do with your metrics. Optimization has to do with making choices and making the best use of the resources available to you, which is something that obviously metrics helps you to do, helps you to understand. But you can do metrics without optimization. You can't do optimization without metrics.
So that's perfect. I think what we should do, though, is you have this really great framework around metrics and optimization. This is like a setup because I know, and I can't wait for you to talk about it. So, but I did that was I was just trying to think. Well, that's a perfect definition. So let's go from here. Let's just get into this. So, to the CMO and the VP of marketing, what are the pillars, or what is the framework for metrics and optimization that you want to have or create in your organization?
Okay, well, I think that we think of it in terms of really kind of three major steps to make it happen, if you will. So you want to think of the process. Let's assume that, like many organizations, you're really starting with relatively bare bones capabilities. We won't say nothing, but most organizations, the metrics infrastructure is pretty lightweight. So the first thing you want to do really is to just get that data in place. Get your data flows under control, capture the information that you need, get it organized, get it placed. Technically, we're not going to worry about how you're going to do it in a dashboard, a database reporting system. Somehow or other, get the data assembled in a place where it's accessible. And there's a couple of tasks within that, specifically for B2B marketers, probably the first one is to have some sort of a framework or a model that you can lay it into, because otherwise it's just this whole kind of blooming confusion of data that's buzzing around and doesn't really lend itself to doing anything with. So, in the B2B world, obviously, we talk about the funnel, phrase you're familiar with, I think, and we talk about dividing the movement of our leads through the stages in the funnel, and there are lots of different models about what those stages should be. It doesn't really matter so long as you pick one, and so long as you actually have a way to A, track people, and B, to know who's where at any given moment in time. So you have to have not just kind of a conceptual definition of what this stage or that stage means, but a very specific operation or technical definition, so that you can look at your data and say, okay, this person is at this particular stage right now. This is different from the stage they were at last month. And the next step after that is to know, well, what did I do to that person, and what did that person do that led them to move from one stage to the next. So there's that first whole stage of getting your information organized, and specifically getting the information organized so that you can analyze it by individual, tracking specific individuals through that. Once you have your data organized, and really that's about half the battle, then you can begin to track your metrics stage by stage. So what are my conversion rates? What are my counts, first of all, but what are my conversion rates? What am I spending against people at those stages? How long are they spending in those stages? What am I spending against them? So there's about 5 or so kind of key metrics that you really need to look at a stage-by-stage level to get a sort of a basic idea of what your marketing programs are doing. So once you have that, that's all stage 1. You tired yet? Now you get to stage 2. Fortunately, there's only 3 stages, which is to actually do some testing against it. Because first of all we're talking about is essentially observing. This is what's going on.
Yeah.
And again, until you can know what's going on, you can't do anything. But now once you have the observation piece of it pretty much under control, you can now begin to say, okay, let me make a change and let me see what the result of that change is. And the good news is that if you have your metrics in place, you actually can observe those changes and you can actually see what the result is. Because otherwise you make a test and often you don't really know what the result is. Maybe you know, oh yeah, email A had higher response than email B, and well, that's nice, but knowing that it had higher response doesn't really translate to knowing what the net result at the end of the funnel was. Did more people buy as a result? So they have a high response, but they were also writing back to say, never write me again. That's not the response you're looking for. So you have to have that end-to-end view before you can really make sense of your tests. So we talk about testing, and this is all stage 2 is testing. We talk really about 2 things. We talk about testing the right thing, so test things that matter. The things that are easy to test aren't necessarily the things that matter. One of the things that we ran into recently in some of our hands-on work with marketers was, well, it's really easy to test subject lines. And it's fun to test subject lines. You can kind of bet. You have a little office pool about who's going to win and all that, But does it really, I almost said move the needle. I try to avoid cliche. Does it really make a difference? And it may or may not, but there are other things like the number of emails that you send that are actually much more impactful, and they're a little harder to set up those tests because it means kind of changing your campaign structures and maybe even having an A/B split, so creating kind of 2 parallel campaigns. Definitely more work, but frankly more likely to have an impact. So you have to be pretty careful about what you test. And the second thing you have to do is you actually have to test correctly. So you have to have test designs that are valid. You have to have tests that are executed cleanly. When we talk about this, we put up a picture of the movie The Fly, the horror film, because the movie The Fly is really about testing process. The guy didn't have a clean testing area. He had this little fly in his little data transformation chamber, and sure enough, the fly got mixed up with his DNA when he was transformed. So that's all about bad testing. That's the moral of that movie is, be careful what you test. So next time you set up a test, remember you don't want to end up like the fly. So you have to have accurate test design, and that means, proper controls, proper sample sizes. I don't know if you want to talk about sample size, but, it's just got to kind of do it right. Not rocket science, back to the fly perhaps, not nuclear physics, but you do have to set these things up right. So that's all about testing. And then the third thing, which almost goes without saying, except that a lot of people need to hear it, is you actually got to use the results. Because it's amazing how often people will run a test, say, oh, wow, shorter subject lines are better. Well, that's nice, but now I have to rewrite all my subject lines, so I'm not going to bother with that. I'm just going to say, that was interesting, or maybe I'll change one subject line, the one that I tested. But, of course, I have dozens, if not hundreds, of emails. I really should change them all if I really think I've proven consistently that short subject lines are better. So you really have to take those test results and leverage them and use them across your program, because otherwise, why bother, right? So those, at a very high level and a very fast pace, those are kind of the three basic steps. You have to set up data flows, you have to test properly, and then you have to have a process that actually uses the results. So that's the framework that we think in terms of.
Perfect. And then, we should talk. I'll only ask a couple, quote unquote, digging in questions, because there's some bigger strategic ones we should talk about. But one was, you did mention sample size, and you said proper sample size. That can be challenging in B2B. We've talked about that before. Why don't you address that a little bit for the CMO VP of Marketing listening today?
Well, the issue, and I, back in the day, I started out in the consumer marketing world, where we had much larger quantities to work with, so it was not quite the same issue. In B2B, you often just don't have a lot of volume. So there often is a limit to the number of cases that you can put in your tests, and it's always a popular discussion of how big a sample size is. I cannot tell you how many times this has come up bars and things, airplane flights. People are like, oh, what's your opinion of sample size? The rule of thumb on sample size, to make a very long story very, very short, because it is can be a complex topic. The first thing to realize is it really is about the number of responses. It's not about the number of people in the test group. It's about how many you're going to get back. And to cut through a lot of qualifications that the PhDs out there would like to hear, aim for between 50 and 100 responses in each test cell. So whatever sample size you need to get to that, based on your expected response rate, that's kind of the sample size that you want to work against. And if you do that, you'll have quite reliable results. You're not going to be able to tell the difference between 5% and 5.01%, but you'll be able to tell a difference between a 5% and a 6%, or a 5% and a 7% response. And that's the kind of difference that again, you should be testing for. You're not testing for these little subtle things. You want to test things that are going to have a big enough impact to actually matter.
Yeah.
That's a very short primer on sample size.
No, that's important. And then one thing also I think is really important is, when you work with clients, there's to set up, it's almost like there's a mentality thing, there's a process and all this. But the metrics and optimizations is really for everything that can be tested in the marketing department. Is that right? I mean, it's not just an email, outbound email, the same methodology.
No, actually everything can and should be tested. One of the things that we try to really get across is, and even when you write about this, we talk about customer treatments, a very, very generic term, because it could be the content of the outbound message, it could be the landing page, it could be the offer that you're making, it could be the number of messages they're getting, it could be the different products they're being dealt with, it could be whether they're even getting a sales message or a service message. There are all those aspects of customer treatment that can and should be tested. And the other point about that is that you need to look at them in combination. You have to, because getting back to the sample size issue, because you don't have that many things you can test at once, you kind of want to test a set of things. And what you really want to do in testing is you really want to set up kind of a hypothesis and say, if this hypothesis is true, then here's the 6 different things I would change to sort of support that hypothesis. So if you think that simplicity is better, my messages are too complex, it's not just the subject line, it's the subject line, it's the copy length, it's the imagery, it's a whole bunch of different things. It's the nature of the content that you're offering them, all these different things. And you have one stream that says, okay, I'm going to have simpler stuff across all those different dimensions. And that's one group, and that's one test. And then I'm another group that's maybe my control, maybe has the more elaborate content again. So that's only 2 test streams. So I only need, again, that 50 to 100 per, but I'm testing a whole bunch of different things simultaneously. And once I prove the hypothesis, yeah, simpler is better, or no, simpler isn't better, then I can dig in and say, well, within that, what's the optimal level of simplicity? And now I test, this subject line versus that subject line, and I can dig in. But I have to at least start at a pretty high level and test a whole bunch of different things more or less simultaneously, but in different groups, so that I can kind of get it approximately right. Again, it all comes back to testing the big things that are going to make a difference.
That's perfect. Okay, so how about let's talk about we have the foundation, which is what you need to go do. Now, how do you mobilize? How do you set your organization up to be able to support this? And I mean, talk about it from people, process, technology, all the, as I say, I'm the CMO and I'm listening. I go, David, got it. I got to go do this. So what am I going to need to be successful here? And I will throw in a plug. Besides David Raab and Raab Associates, which is one way to go start the process and handle this. The other things to go think about as well.
Okay. Well, you're right, and that's exactly it. It's easy to get excited about measurement, or at least I get excited about measurement. Some of us get excited about measurement, but it's one of those things like kind of brushing your teeth. Like, you need to do it, and actually it is kind of interesting. But then what do you do? How do you make it happen is where most people sort of fall down. And yeah, people process technology is kind of the framework, although you have to add in a couple other things. But, we talked a little about technology already, and, the data is there. The technology is usually not the problem today. It could always be better. But most people, assuming at least you have a marketing automation system, you kind of have a lot of data floating around that is the raw material for your measurement. But the process is trickier. Part of that is having, again, like process related to specific things like, proper test design we were just talking about, understanding, what to test even before the test design, and then really critical, and a critical thing that people fall off, again, is having a process to make use of those tests. We talked about that a little, but it is a process issue more than anything else. It's an issue of making sure that every time you have a test, there's an analysis that's published and it's stored in some sort of an organized fashion, so you can go back and see a month from now, or your successor, because you've been promoted, of course, is able to go back so you don't have to retest the same thing. So you really need a repository for your tests, and you need some sort of a process to make sure that tests are used properly. And then you get to people, and I would add, certainly there's a matter of training of individuals is very important. They have to know how to do all these things correctly. And then the other thing that they have to do is they have to have an organization that's supportive of testing and is willing to do fact-based decisions and to act on these things, because, of course, if you're not going to act on them because, the test gives a result that you don't believe because your gut tells you otherwise, well, don't spend too much energy on the testing if you're not going to get any value from it.
Yeah. And we've talked about this before. I thought this was interesting in terms of, do you need what would you call it, data scientists and folks in your organization? And, tell me your reaction to that as you talk about people. Is this about going out and getting yourself some data scientists, or is this something that folks in the organization can already do? Tell us a little bit more about the types of people we should have to support this type of operation.
Yeah, well, this is, I may be a minority opinion on this, but honestly, every good marketer that I've ever known has been a fairly analytical person. And part of that is because I started out in direct marketing, where by definition you're analytical. But even the good brand marketers, and I say the good ones, they really live and die by their numbers. They're business people first, and they're creative geniuses second, by and large. So I think most people who are professional marketers are more than capable of doing the kinds of analysis that's required. They need some training. Some of them maybe even need a little bit of psychological counseling to get over their little fear of numbers. But again, most of them really don't have as much of a fear of numbers as the popular and common culture suggests. Yeah. So I think the people on your staff, with a little bit of help, probably can do most of it. If you can go out and buy a bushel of data scientists down at the farmers market, that's cool. But they're kind of hard to find, and so it's not so easy to do. And in any event, then you have to train them in your organization. So you do need a certain amount of skills. There are certainly some of the more technical issues, getting back to things like this, the real sample size, for example, where you need somebody who does have a bit more technical or statistical training. But by and large, that's a small part of the problem. I mean, most of the issue with measurement and optimization is about just doing the basics right. It's not doing about the real fancy stuff.
And I guess the answer is depends. So we've talked about how in my past life, we actually had a very good, very metrics-oriented organization. And, we used to meet quite frequently on it, but I would overreact and want to optimize everything right away. And I don't know if you have any best practices around that third pillar, which is the ability to go do something about it. I'm just curious about that. Maybe it's not that great of a question. It's just really personal to me. My team used to say, well, wait, right? You have to wait. So I know what they'd say. I know what the data says, but let's let the sample grow. And then they were usually right that I just needed a little bit of time, or they might, sometimes. Well, that was really the big thing is, when, and what metrics do you talk about at what time? And I'm assuming the answer is depends, but I wonder if you have any best practices around that.
I don't know if the answer is it depends. Honestly, the answer is if it's a formal test, and not everything is quite so formal, you have to say, I'm going to do X number of things, I'm going to get X number of responses, and wait until you actually have finished the process. It is really easy to look at the first responses and get all excited if they show what looks like a winner. But we've seen again and again and again that the early leader doesn't necessarily end up as the final victor. I guess I'm not as old as the Bible, but I think it says that in the Bible as well, right? Race is not so swift. So you do have to have a little bit of patience, and this is the contrary to the stereotype of the marketers who don't care about numbers. It's the marketers like, oh, what's this morning's flash report? What are the numbers from yesterday saying I'm going to react to that? No, it's just today's numbers. You do have to kind of wait until you have a valid amount. And the other thing that people do, which is different but related, is sometimes they'll look at a previous kind of indicator. So they'll look at the open rate on the email, and they won't wait to see how many actual forms get filled out because there's fewer form fills, and it takes a little later for that to happen. But, well, you would think, the more opens I get, the more form fills I get. Turns out that's not always the case. So you really have to wait to get those form fills, wait to get the right metric. And then depending on the nature of the test, it's not just, again, what that particular email did to you, but what was the results a month later and 2 months later, 3 months later for those same people, because that email, again, it may have had high results and even a high form fill rate, but if those people didn't end up buying because you brought in the wrong people, you really need to wait to see that before you jump off and change all your programs. Then to come to find out later that you just shot yourself in the foot.
Yeah. All right. So actually, for you and I, we've been really efficient. I feel like we've made a lot of ground in a shorter amount of time than usual. It's usually my fault because I start asking you all these questions. So this is for the CMOs and VPs of marketing. They always, one thing I've heard from them that I'm not sure how to broach, but I'll tell you is, as they start to become a technology organization, what are the metrics that they take? So they have people that bring metrics to them, and then, how should they, talk about metrics with the rest of the organization? I'm interested in that. So
there's kind of different kinds of metrics for different purposes. You have a lot of metrics that are sort of internal to marketing that are more about efficiency. How much time am I spending to set up an email, and I want to be efficient about that, and and even things like there's volume metrics of how many am I pushing out, both about cost and just about what am I doing. And those are kind of internal. They're important. You have to watch those. But as a CMO talking to the CEO or the CFO, they're really not that interested in your internal metrics. They're really interested in, how much money have you made me, preferably, yesterday. And they also have very short attention spans, and they also want to see quick results. So sometimes you just have to sort of tell them, hold back. But so marketers need to, CMOs need to present out revenue-oriented metrics. Things like, the amount of expected revenue based on the campaigns that I've done, the profitability, the return on investment, those kinds of things. You want to be able to forecast that out. Marketers, or rather CEOs and CFOs, really like forecasts.
Yeah.
They live and die by them. So if you can show that you're actually able not just to forecast, but to forecast more accurately than they were otherwise, that's a good thing. And of course, if the forecast is going up rather than down, so much the better. But even if it's going down, they need to know that too.
Yeah.
So those are the, you have to have a kind of a value orientation in the metrics you present outside. And the second point to make about that is the specific metrics do change over time based on your strategic goals. So if you're setting up a balanced scorecard type thing, the key performance indicators, they're really measuring progress towards specific goals. So if my goal this year is to penetrate in the market segment, then my metrics should have something to do with, should show my penetration in that segment. That's not a revenue number.
Yeah.
It may not even correlate necessarily. It may even go that profitable, but if that's sort of my strategic goal is, I need that KPI. Now next year, that's not going to be my strategic goal. I need a different KPI. So they change over time, and they have to be very related to your specific objectives.
Yeah. So, as you know, Lattice Engines is my partner in crime in putting this all together, and and I'm pretty sure Brian Carden. I'm not sure, but when we first talked about it, he said, "All right, you got to go get David Raab for metrics and optimization, and I want you to ask him about big data." So, where is big data going to play in all of this, and if it is, and where does it play now, and where will it play in the future?
Well, big data, kind of a loose term, shall we say?
Yeah.
It's always, the definition is pretty much more data than you can handle, right? That's what makes it big. But if you talked about more specifically, there's more of a concrete definition that has to do with all the data streams that are new to us, because there's so much digital information out there. Things are just so much more instrumental. We can gather so much more data about the details of behavior. It's not just response or not response. It's all this other data that gives attributes to those two events and also gives other intermediate events. So the trick with big data is filtering. It's, I got all this stuff. What's it mean, and which of it can I kind of ignore, really, because I can't really process all of it. I can't process it mentally. I can process it, in a nice big computer, and if I'm lucky, and this is where, again, those data scientists do come in, I got some really smart people and some really smart computer software that'll tell me, well, oh, these are the things that really matter. These are the behaviors that actually turn out to be predictive, and focus on them and report on them. So big data is, in my mind, it's a challenge. It's more than anything else. It's a filtering challenge. It's an analysis, understanding challenge, and then, of course, always being actionable based on your findings. So, it's more about that than speeds and feeds, and my computer's bigger than your computer and all that.
Yeah. Terrific. See, we were so efficient here. We got everything that we needed to talk about out on the table. And I would mention to anybody listening.
I can show you pictures from my vacation if you
like. We can add that for next time. But I do, David, I do want to make sure everyone knows that, you are a resource for metrics and optimization, and frankly, for, all the technology and processes around marketing. And so, as people, I hope you enjoyed this, and you can, follow more. David, what's your preferred way for people to follow you or connect with you?
Well, my blog, which is called the Customer Experience Matrix, but just Google David Raab blog,
Yeah.
and you'll find it. Is certainly where a frightening portion of my thoughts get displayed to the world. Fortunately, most of them are, fairly presentable. Um, so that's the easiest way, just to sort of, keep up with what I'm seeing out in the industry that I think is worth noticing, and that talks about a lot of different things, but there's certainly a lot of metrics in it. Beyond that, reach out directly, draab at robassociates.com is the email, or I'm out there on Twitter as DRAAB. I'm easy enough to find. Again, just Google. There's actually a couple of David Raabs out there, but you'll figure out which one is me. And we are consultants. We do charge for our time, but I'll talk to anybody for 15, 20 minutes because it's market research for me. So, I'm certainly welcome email inquiries, just, see what's going on with somebody, and I'm always happy to chat.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you for your time today, and that was a big learning session. And for the written portion, I'm going to take stuff from this and as well from a lot of your writing, and then get your okay. And so people will be able to have a written version of what we've talked about. And it's a hot topic. I mean, it is funny, isn't it? Because David's one of the smartest guys I know, yet when he synthesizes everything, it does come out simply. And I think that's one of the beauties of your thought processes and your methodology. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you being out here today with us.
My pleasure. Look forward
So
to seeing the results.
yeah, absolutely. Me too. And nervously getting ready to create all the results.
Exactly.
So,
See, actually got recorded.
yeah. So thank you everyone for being here today. Again, this is part of a project with Lattice Engines where we are studying the future, well, actually the now of marketing technology and technology for marketers, and hoping that we can be a real resource for CMOs and VPs of marketing. And certainly today's session is a great piece of content for every VP of marketing and CMO to follow. So thank you everyone for being here today, and look forward to seeing you again. And you should look forward to seeing more from us. Thanks everyone.